In today's session, I will be building on what we discussed in the previous session. I guess to bring everyone up to speed, in the previous session, I talked about women and how women are perceived in relation to the value men assign to women of different marital status. I talked about women who are single, widowed, divorced, or unmarried women with kids, including unmarried women without kids. And I said that the value men associate with such women are not evenly distributed. They vary. In principle, most men prefer single women who are sexually active. Although I have a specific position in relation to those who are still single but virgins, the marketplace gets to decide. This is not my opinions per se. This is how the market decides. Obviously, certainly my anecdotal observations play a role, but in principle, the market gets to decide. Now, I stated that in terms of desirability, what you tend to find is, because we have a sexual marketplace that is very active, constantly changing, demanding new things, I made reference to the fact that the most desirable for men are single women who are sexually active. And if a man was to choose, and if this is a man of a certain socioeconomic status, looking to select a woman for a long-term relationship with the idea of marriage, in terms of his selection process, he would perceive women differently. A woman who is widowed with no kids, a woman who is divorced with no kids. And then number 4 is where you start to get a separation. So you have almost 3 different groups. The first is single women. Second, widowed or divorced with no kids. And then the third is widowed with kids plus divorced with kids. And we call this type 1 single mothers. Number 5 are the unmarried with kids. But same father. So the kids come from the same father. These are type 2 single mothers. But single mothers is a reference used by women, or is a politically correct reference used by society. According to men in the marketplace, we call women in type 2, we call you baby mamas. Because we try to separate you from those who are in category 4. A woman who's been widowed is not perceived in the same light as a woman who was unmarried and who has a child. A woman who is divorced and has a child through or from that relationship is not seen in the same light as a woman who is unmarried but has a child. Men perceive such women very differently. As a matter of fact, if you're widowed, there is almost a feeling of endearment that men have towards a woman who, because depending on your specific value system and beliefs, we're told to look after the widows and the orphans. And a woman who is a widow is treated very, very sensitively in the marketplace, even if she has a child. A woman who has been divorced is also treated respectfully, because it indicates that she was able to find a man who desired her enough to marry her. For whatever reason, it didn't work. Unlike a woman who is unmarried but has a child. in the marketplace, men see that as you lacking self-discipline, self-control, lacking the ability and the discernment to choose rightly. Men generally perceive it to be that you do not associate the importance of marriage above being a mother, which is a disadvantage. And then number 6 is the unmarried with kids, multiple fathers. And multiple fathers, these are usually the most unattractive women in the marketplace. I'm going to say a few things as we move forward. They may not necessarily seem to be the kindest things. However, what I'm doing in these sessions is I'm really just expressing conversations that men will have in a barber shop, at a friend's place, having drinks. What we talk about when we feel that there is privacy. I'm revealing what men think, and rather than attack the position, use ad hominems, criticize the speaker. I said in the previous session that if there is something wrong with listening to a man express such dating recommendations, then recognize that there is a spirit within. And so all you have to do is close your eyes and listen to the spirit speak. But women who have had kids from multiple fathers are the least attractive and the least respected in the eyes of men. We call this type 3. Women call them single mothers. Men call them baby mamas. So what I'd like to do in today's session is just go through these 6 groups of women. Oh, there is a 7th, so just bear with me. But let me go through, I'd like to go through each of these groups of women and provide maybe a subtle, not an in-depth recommendation, but a subtle observation on how each group can address the dating journey to ensure that they achieve what they're looking to achieve. Now, there is a 7th category. So we have group 1 or A, we have group B, we have group C, and then we have group D. Group D is number 7. And this is single women who are virgins. Now, what is really sad is I've listed number 7, virgins, single virgins, as the least attractive, which is telling of the society that we live in today, that prior to the 21st century and the 20th century, women that were the most desired were single virgins. As a matter of fact, it was not considered possible that in a small community, when we still lived in communities, it was not considered possible that a woman could be unmarried with kids and have no husband. It was not considered possible. Society frowned very much on such actions. And most women were virgins. At the point of marriage, they were virgins on their wedding day. And that was what was expected. But we have democratized the sexual marketplace. And this really kicked off since the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, from the introduction of the feminist movement. I've said before that the pre-1970s, 1960s feminist movement was one I support, still support, but the modern day feminism and modern day feminist movement in its various iterations have done more harm to women than good. Certainly, a broken clock is right twice every day, so there are still good things you can say about feminism. But the problem primarily with feminism, for which I do support, was feminism was about choice. It was about freedom. It was about recognition about women and the role they could provide to society. It was about liberation. I support all of that. However, the modern day feminism Rather, let me go back. The pre-1970s feminism was to say, listen, men in society should not be treated in a more superior way to women. That women were just as equal as men in the eyes of God. They were just as equal as men in the eyes of the law. That there should be equality of opportunity, but not necessarily equality of outcome. That we're all special people, and that we should be given the opportunity to choose our path, and that men should not dictate to women how they should live, what they should do, and the contributions they should provide to society. I accept all of that. However, the post-1970s movement developed almost a hatred for men. The hatred became so strong where men were seen as enemies. And there was this value that was put forward, an ideal. An ideal is simply an idea that you are in love with. There was an ideal put forward that women were to behave like men, that a woman could wear the same trousers as a man, and that she could behave like a man. But the core part of the modern feminism movement was that society was deeply flawed because men had done so much harm in the past to women and to society, and that there was a war between men and women. That war achieved a stalemate when women in the West, now this does not apply to outside the West, but in areas where such a movement was put forward, that movement achieved its natural equilibrium when women were given the same rights as men. Now, it took a long time, no doubt, but at the point where such rights, such obligations, such responsibilities, such opportunities were made available, the war should have ended. The post-1970s feminism has continued that war, although men are saying, we do not want to fight. We're done. You've achieved what you wanted. Now, can we just get back to being men? It's got to the point where men are now vilified for just being men. I'm not going to go into detail. That's a deviation from today's session. But the point I'm making was that as part of the allure to draw in new participants to the feminist movement, consequences, constraints, trade-offs were removed from the original gospel of the pre-1970s feminist movement. Because everything you do has a choice. You have a choice. Now, you have the choice, but there are consequences to your choices. You have the choice, but there are constraints that come with the choices you make. You have the choice, but there are trade-offs you have to make. And so a lot of young girls have been sold all of the positives of feminism with none of the trade-offs. And that's what you're finding in today's society. Women were told, you can behave like a man. Men's sexual mores and our values had declined as of the 1960s. Men were not behaving in the most prudent way. And women were told, you can behave just like men. If men are going to behave like dogs, then women, you should behave just like dogs. And so what you've found today is the unintended consequences of certain decisions have left some women in positions that they find themselves in different groups. And therefore, unfortunately, for things to change, the woman in the equation has to make a change, which is what I intend this sessions to be about, to provide some ways through which a woman, irrespective of where you find yourself, you can achieve what you desire. Certainly there will be a trade-off to be made, but you can at least find some level of peace in your decision. So we have 4 groups, 7 different types of women. This is where I begin today's session, and I'm going to go fast. I made reference to, and I'll keep referring back to this as we go along, because it's a very important piece of knowledge to have. In the dating scene, all men are not the same in terms of their intentions. Some men come to the dating scene looking for casual relationships. Some come for medium to long-term relationship, and some come from marriage, life partnership. The first thing a woman has to do is discern, firstly, what the man wants, and compare this to what she wants. And whenever there is an unalignment in terms of expectations and desires, the woman should disconnect. Again, I said, women are the gatekeepers to their bodies. They hold the key to their bodies. They hold the key to their physical bodies in terms of intimacy and sex. They hold the key to their bodies in terms of reproduction or creating life. So a woman decides who she gets intimate with and who she has sex with. She also decides who she reproduces for. Men, on the other hand, decide and are the gatekeepers to relationships and marriage. So a man decides who he gives his last name to, or who he chooses as a wife, and who he dedicates his life to. The man decides that. So the first step is for a woman to decide or observe what she believes the man is looking for. So irrespective of the category you find yourself, the first question is, for the woman, am I looking for something casual? Am I looking for something medium to long term? Am I looking for something that is a life commitment? The second question is then to say, okay, in the dating environment, we all go through different stages. Introduction. We go through conversation and communication. The third is intimacy plus sex. The fourth, relationships. The fifth, commitment. Is when a person says, I'm committed to you. The sixth is dedication, which is commitment plus exclusivity, plus where I dedicate not just my physical body, my resources, my time, my emotions, my long-term goals, my vision. I dedicate that to you, to us. We become a we rather than just you and me. And number 7 is marriage. So depending on the stage of the interaction, a woman has to evaluate a man differently. This brings us to today's session, where I intend to explain the type of men that women in each of these categories should target. If you are a single woman, you have access to all men in the marketplace. You are the most desirable. If you're widowed, unfortunately, you do not have the same level of desire from a man's perspective. And the reason is simply because emotionally most men will feel that you've gone through a traumatic experience. And depending on how long you were married, let me use an example. Let me apologize. But let me use an example because this will make a lot of sense. I was having a conversation with someone some time back, and she had been in a relationship for 8 years. And the relationship came to an end. And as we were talking, I was asking her questions. And I asked her, I said to her, have you, since the relationship ended, because the relationship did not end well, I said, there was a break of trust from his part. I said, have you gone to see a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor? And she looked very surprised. She says, I don't understand why. And I said, well, we're all like a sponge. We go to the gym, we eat food, we train, we exercise, we do yoga. We have all these things we do in terms of our well-being, for our physical well-being. So we look after our physical body. But our mind is like a sponge, and our emotions are part of our mind. Our intellect and our emotions make up primarily what we call our mind. But we absorb everything that takes place in our life, and we hold on to all those experiences. And one of the best ways to have a healthy mindset is every now and then to go and do some exercise. And that exercise, yes, occurs when you listen to a sermon, when you listen to words of inspiration, information, insight, education, yes. But also that also occurs when you sit down with someone who has been trained to listen to your experiences and to try and understand how those experiences have affected you and will affect you in the future, so they can provide you with a guiding pathway to recovery or a guiding pathway to fulfillment. And I said, everyone should do that regularly. The point of this was to say this. She had been dating this guy for 8 years. Before she dated him, she had dated 2 other people, 1 year each. At the time, so in over a 10-year period, she's only really dated 1 man. So I said to her, you may not understand this, but from a man's perspective, if you've ever seen a custom-made car, you can see a Honda Civic, a 1996 Honda Civic, and they all look the same. Sometimes some people, especially boys, will take the Honda Civic, which is their car, and take it to a dealership and have it really customized. They put on 22-inch wheels, they put on subwoofers, great entertainment systems in the car. They change the engine so that the noise, the exhaust are much bigger, and suddenly you have an enhancement or a customized model of a car. Same car, but customized. And I said, in the same way, when you've been with someone for 8 years, you've been customized. You've really, in many ways, you have been a wife to someone. And if you're coming back into the dating scene, recognize that customization you need to take it back into the factory and have some of those parts that were put into the car removed. Because otherwise you will bring the same head and heart with you into the same relationship. It's a combination of hard work that you have to do on your part to de-customize yourself. H-A-R-D, hard work. But it's also heart work, H-E-A-R-T, which is where we take down all the layers of emotions and all the trauma you may have experienced to ensure that the next man is not paying a price for the sins of another man. So in the same way, women who are widows are considered to have gone through a painful experience. And when you lose a loved one, it's not a very easy experience to recover from. And what that means is that people in level 2 are not available to all men. There are some men who will say, I do not want to get married to a widow. I do not want to date a widow. So you have fewer men. Women who have been divorced have even fewer men. Women who are widowed but with a child move into what we call the second, so group C, which is where it gets really complicated. But you are exposed and you are attractive to even fewer men. However, men generally perceive women who are widowed or who are divorced with kids very differently to women who are unmarried with kids. And those who are unmarried with kids from the same father or from multiple fathers are the least attractive in the marketplace. This will not be a very, very nice thing to say, but if you were to sit down and you were to poll 1,000 men, I'm very confident that if those men were asked the question anonymously, without any repercussions in relation to their answers, 95, 96, 97% of them would say, I do not want to get married to a woman who has children. Now, there are exceptions, and I will deal with those exceptions. But most men who have never had kids, and I'm referring to most men who want to get married, who want a family of their own, who have never had kids, do not want to raise the children of other men. And then finally, single women have access to fewer men during the introduction, conversation, intimacy, and sex stage, because most men in the marketplace lead with sex. Most men, not all men, most men, even those who are looking to get married, because most men are already sexually active. A virgin is not sexually active. Most men do not want to wait a year, 2 years before they actually have sex, except there's an arrangement that takes place between the woman and the man, where the man says, listen, I will accept you as a wife. You have all the qualities I want, and I will get married to you. But until we get married, there has to be an agreement that I should be allowed, in order to meet my sexual needs, I should be allowed maybe to have one sexual partner, a woman who will meet my sexual needs, but who I will not be intimately attached to. Women need intimacy. Women need intimacy but want sex. Men need sex, but will happily accept intimacy. But we are not the intimate sex of the two. We want sex. And that means that women who are single find it even harder to date. Because a woman who is single and who is dating a man will have her intimacy needs met. But the man on the other side, if he is sexually active, will not have his sexual needs met. So you have this imbalance between both parties. And so for that reason, most men are really scared of the idea of actually even getting involved with a virgin. As a matter of fact, here is something that I believe to be true, because this applies in my case and across the men I know, but most men would agree to this. A man who is in the marketplace, who is looking for a casual relationship, if he comes across a woman who is a virgin, and even if the woman offers to the man the opportunity for him to be her first, if the man's intention is for something short term, good men will turn down the offer and walk away. And the reason is because we understand karma. We understand the covenant process. We don't take good girls and turn them into bad girls. Men look for bad girls and use them for fun. Good men will walk away if you're a virgin and if you're a good girl. We cannot have that stigma, that karma, hovering over our heads. And that means that for most women who are single and virgins, unfortunately, they are usually the least attractive in the sexual marketplace in relation to casual dating. But in relation to marriage, providing it is an arranged marriage or an arrangement based on religious reasons, based on cultural reasons, ethnic disposition, or health reasons, there are certain men who find single virgins the most attractive. But it has to be based on an arrangement where you have a woman who's a Christian and a man who's a Christian, a woman who's a Muslim and a man who is a Muslim, a woman who's a Hindu and a man who is a Hindu, a woman who perhaps is from a specific ethnic group, looking for a man in that specific ethnic group. These are very unique circumstances. So the first thing to say is, depending on what group you find yourself, you have to understand your value in the marketplace. That's the first step. And whatever your value is, accept that. 3 steps. See things as they are. Now, see things as you would hope that it can be resolved. Not based on how you wish it were, but as you would hope it can be resolved. And finally, proceed to try to achieve your hope. So the first step is understand your value. The second, which is attached to the first, this is 1B, is for you to understand the price that you're asking men to pay for. To put it in context, if you were a 5 with no kids, a woman who is also a 5 with 1 child should not ask for the same, should not have the same expectations as the first woman. She should not. It means that this woman who has 1 child will have access to fewer men, and unfortunately, men will be willing to pay less for her, which would mean she might go for a man of the same level, let's say a 5, an average man. She has to go for a man that is below average, maybe a 4. No judgment. Now that does not mean that she can't get a higher man. It simply means that if she positions herself for the same type of man, a 5 or above, then automatically, remember, she excludes everything below. And in order for her to get success or be successful, she needs to be open to the realization that the price the man is willing to pay is not the same. So once you've gone through the process of understanding your value and accepting your value and accepting the price you're asking for, you have to secondly identify the trade-offs. The trade-offs that you're willing to make. These trade-offs come as a result of the constraints that your decisions have led you to make. These constraints are based on the choices you made in the past, good, bad, or indifferent. And those choices you made, unfortunately, had consequences. One of those consequences could be you have 1 child out of wedlock, based on a choice you made to have sex unprotected and to carry the baby to term. That's the consequence. You have a child. Now, the constraint is that you do not have access to all eligible bachelors in the marketplace. The trade-off you have to make is that you have to accept. I don't like using the word settle, because that assumes that the woman is better than the man. No, you have to accept the men available to you and who are willing to pay a price. Now, the men are not paying to buy you. The men are simply saying, this is what I will invest in time, resources, energy, commitment, emotions to you. This is what I believe you're worth. The third is to be realistic about your expectations. So be realistic about your expectations. A woman who is single, a list of standards she wants in a man, a list of expectations. We all have a bucket list, standards, expectations. You might begin when you're single, when you're 22. You might say, I want a man who is tall, dark, handsome, 6 foot, someone who's 6 foot, who has 6 figures in terms of his earning potential or wealth, who has a 6-pack, and who has a network of friends around him. I also want a man who has 6 qualities. He's funny, he's kind, he's faithful, he's hardworking, he puts my needs first, and he has no children. At 21, you could make that demand because your sexual marketplace value and your reproductive fertility value are the highest. When you get to 35, you can't make the same demands. You might decide, well, I want a man who is 6 foot, minimum, but I am 5'4". Therefore, I'm happy to accept a man who is 5'5", all the way up to 6 foot. You see, that is a trade-off. You've made a compromise. And that is acceptable. Because at 35, if you want a family to have more kids, you have to recognize that your competition has more to offer. So you're simply accepting the reality of where you find yourself. So the third stage is be realistic about your expectations. And whatever standards you have, I'm not suggesting that you get rid of your standards. Remember, it's not about having standards. It's about having non-negotiating standards. And if you've set your standards in such a way that you cannot negotiate, you put yourself in a position whereby if you don't get what you want, you're doomed to be alone, which is not good. So don't be too rigid in your standards. I said number 4 is for you to be wise and have a counsel around you. Now let me go back to the lady I mentioned. She said to me that she had never at the time had anyone speak to her about men in the way that I did. I made a number of recommendations to her. I asked her, okay, since you have, this is a very unique, I try not to share too much, but this is a unique one. I said to her, one of the things you have to do is take your mental health seriously. Because if you meet a man who is someone you find attractive and someone you would want to transition to, one of the questions implicitly that the man will ask, not explicitly, because most men are very sensitive. We don't know how to ask direct questions, especially questions that are seen to be too emotionally charged. But implicitly, the man is thinking, if you've been with someone for 8 years, usually it takes, for most women, especially if you've been with someone that long, it usually would take about 25% of the overall time of the relationship for you to recover from the person, especially if you really love the person. So if I date you, for example, for 1 year, 12 months, the woman, remember, men are not as emotionally connected to relationships as women are, which is the reason why to men, intimacy and sex are two different things. A man can transition out of a relationship much faster than a woman, which means that a woman needs to be more careful in her relational encounters with most men. But a woman who dated me for 12 months would need about 3 months before she gets back into the dating market, especially if she was a good girl and if she's a home, almost a well-raised, educated woman, someone who begins with intimacy first before sex. She can't just give herself to another man immediately, though she has the choice. Now, it doesn't always have to be 25% of the time. It really depends on the intensity of the relationship. If the relationship was kind and loving, it takes longer. If the relationship was abusive and traumatic, it takes even longer. But if we use 25%, I said to her, well, if you dated him for 8 years, then you should make room for the fact that you can't just transition in 2 or 3 months. 25% of 8 years is 2 years. And that means any man you're dating in that period will be what we call your rebound boy. Men understand this. Let me say this to ladies so you get this right. When men start dating women, some men, not all men, especially men who play the game, who play the field, when they meet a woman who has just come out of a relationship, some men find those women to be ideal. And the reason is because of this principle. They know you're not emotionally available, and therefore they can be very casual with you because you are not ready. So they do not come to the table with their hearts on the table. Even if you say you're ready, the men understand he does not want to be the rebound boy, the person who you use to flush out your ex. But in any case, a woman who is dated for 8 years, you need at least 2 years to flush out everything that was wrong with that relationship and to actually give yourself time to self-love, self-care, redefine your self-identity, because in relationships, if you're not careful, the relationship remolds who you are and your identity. It takes a while for you to regain yourself. And sometimes a break in between is a useful way for you to rediscover yourself, reinvent yourself, reposition yourself for you to be admired. Sometimes women, if you've dated a man who was not really great, who was insecure, it takes a beating on your self-confidence. Your self-image and self-concept of yourself is so poor because the man has been using words, maybe not physical abuse, but just words, chipping away your self-esteem. Whereas there are some men you would date who you emerge from the relationship a much better woman than you started, which is usually harder for the woman because she's so grateful that she was with someone who was good and maybe is still heartbroken that the relationship has ended. In any case, be wise, which is number 4, be wise. Number 5 is actually to use the process of inversion. And I say the process of inversion is simply to say, okay, I'm in the dating marketplace. If I'm a man, and a woman's thinking this way now, if I am a man, how can I go through all the women in the marketplace and just use them and not commit to them? What qualities would I look for? How would I manipulate the women? So think from a man's perspective. And once you've identified all the qualities the woman will have and all the behaviors the woman would have, you invert such behaviors. So for example, you say, well, when I start dating, if I'm using a dating app, I should state very clearly on the app, this is who I am. I'm not interested in casual relationships. I would like something more long-term. Just so you know, I have kids. The mistake women make is believe that when the man gets to know them, then the man will understand. And therefore, they keep out of the conversation the fact that they have a child or they have children. And the moment they put it on the table, the man disappears. By that time, you've given him so much of your time, emotions, and your body. So he runs. Whereas it's better to eliminate what we call the process of elimination. You eliminate those who are not for you. Remember what I said in the previous page. If you're widowed with kids, you have access to a fewer pool of men. You can't be expecting 100% of the men. You might be only exposed to maybe 35% of the men. But in the dating market, if this is a dating site, in the dating market, all the men are looking in your direction. If you are attractive, they all want a piece of you. If you do not make it clear at the early stage that you have kids or that you're divorced, what happens is the 65% of the men will come and knock on your door. Remember, they started with sex. We want sex. We don't just want sex, we need sex. So we'll come to you and knock on your door, and assuming there are 10 men, and 6 of them come and knock on your door, and 6 of them are tall, dark, and handsome, 6 foot tall, 6-pack, wealthy, good family, etc. The first man knocks on your door, you open up yourself to him. He has sex, then you say, I have a child. He walks away. Month 2, the second man comes in, the same thing happens. By the time you get to the month of July, 6 men have come and left. You've lost 6 months of your life. You've given your body to 6 different men. You're now emotionally more intertwined with 6 different people. So the best thing to do for women who are widowed, for women who fall in category B, C, D, is start with the end in mind. Put all your chips on the table. If you're widowed, you should state on your profile, if you're using online dating, you should state on your profile that you are recently widowed or that you're widowed. If you're divorced, you should state that you're divorced, because this information will come out eventually. And women often think, when the man gets to know me, he'll overlook the fact I have kids and I'm divorced or I'm widowed. Not so, because most of the men in the marketplace are shallow. There's a misconception that women hold a lot of men in high esteem. A man looking for sex wants sex. He's thinking with his irrational brain. He just wants sex. By putting your chips on the table, you present yourself to the 35% of the men who are more tailored to the price you're asking for in the marketplace. Now, that means you have fewer interests and fewer dates, but a higher probability that the dates you have could be meaningful. But the key thing is that in that 6 months period, you haven't given yourself to 6 different people, and you hopefully have not exposed your kids to 6 different men. Now, that might mean you have no dates if you keep your standards as you were when you were single and young. But if you reduce your standards and say, well, I'm happy to date a man from 5'5" all the way to 6. And he doesn't have to be between age 28 and 30. I'm happy to date men who are from 28 all the way up to, say, 42. You open up the pool of men available to you. You might even say, I'm happy to date men who are up to 50. I'm happy to date men who already who have been married, who are divorced. The key thing is to just recognize that in using the process of inversion, what you're trying to do is identify how you could make mistakes and then do the opposite. Number 6 is have a strategy. Don't rely on hope. Good women are found. Now, let me say that again. Good women are always found. But wise women are found sooner. And the way this works is that you have to parade yourself to these men. You have to go where the fish are. The man will not come and knock on your front door, which means you have to look for strategic ways to market yourself to these men. I made reference to the fact that if you're unmarried but have kids, if you're divorced, whether you have kids or not, if you're widowed, but certainly if you're age 30 and above, or ideally 33 and above, 32, 33 and above, you should be using dating services, specialized dating services. You should be using dating consultants, people who have a specialized tailored service and who serve a clientele of men, and they can present those men and your profile to those men. You should avoid using, especially for women above 30 and especially above 33, you should avoid using the modern online dating services, Twitter and Bumble, where you swipe left and you swipe right, because it's so transactional. So people don't get to know you. People judge you based on what they see. And unfortunately, if you find yourself in any other categories, B, C, D, and even sometimes even A, people judge based on what they see. Men are visual, so we judge based on what we see first. Whereas if you use a specialized dating service like a matchmaker, like a dating consultant, like an advisory dating service, they can tailor your needs to what the man wants, and they can provide you with access to men across the whole country, because sometimes the good men, the really good men who will match your circumstances, you don't find them on dating apps. They're too busy. They have other things to do. Some of them are not really into social media. Some of them really do not want to put their profiles online. So you need to know how to strategically present yourself, parade yourself to these men. And then number 7 is you have to learn how to negotiate. Now, with that said, let me bring this in by explaining maybe a few things that might be useful. For women who are unmarried with kids, for women who are widowed or divorced with kids, usually the best men you should seek to date are men who already have been married and are divorced or are widowed, or men who already have had kids. And the reason is because they're more sympathetic to your circumstances. They have lived a similar life and they're not judgmental. Men who are single, who've never had kids, who've been working hard and hoping to have a family someday, are usually much more judgmental. So that's the first thing to start with. You also should be open to dating older men, because older men are slightly more mature. They've had the opportunity to live life. They're not very superficial. They're emotionally more contained. As a matter of fact, a man who is in his 50s, who's dating a woman who's 39, who has 2 kids, might relish the opportunity to even start life again, because maybe he's had a very bad experience from a first marriage or a second marriage, and he understands that maybe in this case, because you're unmarried with kids, the reality that your kids are the most important things or people in your life puts him at ease. So he's not always under pressure to entertain and contain your emotions, because some of your emotions are channeled to your children. And all he gets is you when you are available. This could be a very, 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 very successful arrangement where it starts off very slow, very respectfully. But when you guys are together, you spend a great time together. Unlike a single man who is always jealous, immature, distracted, comparing you to other people, hasn't come to his own maturity in terms of his self-image, and is modeling what he's seen on social media or television. So the key thing is to understand that not all men are the same. All men are not the same. And there is nothing wrong in you being slightly less picky and more strategic in the men you pursue. But let me share what I think will be some practical knowledge that could be of assistance. You've heard me make reference to your SMV, your RFV, and your non-SMV. Sexual marketplace value, your reproductive fertility value, your non-sexual marketplace value. Women who are widowed, women who are divorced, and women who are unmarried with kids need to be, they need to be more competitive than women who are single. Because women who are single have the advantage. They can say to the man, there is one thing I can give you, which the woman who is the woman who's unmarried but with kids cannot give you. And the man says what? And she says, I've never given the honor of my womb, of my body, for reproduction to any other man. And therefore you are the first. Which is usually very appealing to most men. However, a woman who falls into any of the other categories apart from being single can still compete competitively. But what that means is that you can compete in many ways. To ensure this is a comparable analogy, let's say the woman is 27, no kids. Similar woman, 27, 1 child. Both women are an 8 in their sexual marketplace value without kids. Remember, just without kids. The fact that the second woman, let's call this one Anne and call this Becky. The fact that Becky has a child drops her down to a 6 automatically from a man's perspective. And the reason is not to do with the fact that her SMV might still be an 8. She might still be attractive. But from a man's perspective, what he sees is an extra pair of hands or mouth to feed. So she drops to a 6. She remains as an 8. However, Becky can still win if Anne is an 8 in her face and her fitness, and an 8 in her body. If Becky is a 6 in the face, obviously, or if she's given a 6 in her SMV, she can augment her attractiveness by taking her body up to a 9, by making sure she's extremely fit. It means she has to work out twice as hard. The fact that she's already had a child puts her at a disadvantage, but she can work twice as hard. She can work on her style, her dress, her mannerisms. She can work on her choice of clothing. She can work on being more natural, because Anne could be more enhanced in her beauty. Makeup, fake hair, fake eyelashes, everything fake. Whereas Becky can be more natural, which is what men really want. A man is thinking about what you would look like naked, lie next to him at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, once he wakes up. Your RFV, which is your reproductive fertility value, because both of you are the same age, there's nothing you can do about it. Nature takes its toll. Unfortunately, because you've had one child, Becky would have a lower sexual reproductive value than Anne. She would have a higher because she has not reproduced for anyone. But this is where all of the work needs to be done. Your non-sexual marketplace value. This is where a woman who may think that she has disadvantages in the marketplace can win. This comes into play in relation to her femininity, whether she's a trad wife, a term we use in the UK to mean traditional. Does she have those traditional values of a wife? It has to do with her temperament. Men do not choose women who turn them on. They choose women who do not turn them off. So Anne could be extremely beautiful, single, no kids, but she might just have an attitude problem. Whereas Becky, equally attractive, but has a child, but she's a traditional wife. She's more feminine. She's softer. She has soft skills. In many ways, she has what we call a childlike ability. And this is something women can work on. You can develop that childlikeness, develop an understanding, an acceptance, an admiration, an appreciation for men. The best way to win is to study men. Most importantly, study the man in question. I'll tell you something that the men really like. A man grows up, and as he grows up, one of the things a man craves from his father is the words, "I'm proud of you." And a father can say, "I'm proud of you, son," and that means more than "I love you." Ladies, understand this. Men we don't connect with "I love you." If a woman says to me, "I love you," I receive it, no problem. But if she says to me, "I'm proud of you," "I'm proud of you" is more superior in a man's eyes than "I love you," because we're not conditioned emotionally in the same way women are. Being proud of me means that you approve of my actions. Those actions connect to my purpose. It connects to my ability to produce, to provide, to protect, to profess, and to pray. It connects to my essence, my being. Praise to a man is one of the most important things women have to learn how to give. Praise. Praise. You've heard of praise and worship in a religious setting. Try that with women. Rather, women, try that with your men. That doesn't mean you bend on the floor and you worship him like a god. No. It means you look for ways to express the things about him that you like. So don't say, "Well, I like how you look in this suit," or "I like your hair." There has to be something specific, because everyone can say, "I like your hair." What makes him different to the next man? Is it the way he speaks? But what is it about the way he speaks? Is it his eyes? What is it specifically about his eyes? So you have to be very specific, which comes from trying to study the man or study men. So A woman who wants to improve her non-sexual marketplace value has to improve her femininity. She has to improve in her traditional values and her traditional skill sets. In other words, she has to become a traditional wife. She has to be understanding, accepting. She has to admire men and appreciate men. And she has to have this childlike manner about her so that men are excited to be in her presence. Most men are usually running from a pain. The pain comes from their past, not their present. The pain could be a pain inflicted by a father, by omission or by commission. The pain could be inflicted by a father by his absence. The pain could also be inflicted by his mother, by her words and her actions. So all men are running away from a pain. A woman can be a place where a man can nest by being his safe refuge, which is why I said most men, more than anything, we want peace. In some of the books of antiquities, it says it's better for a man to live on the roof, on the corner of a roof by himself, than to live in the house with a nagging wife. And it means that your words have to be peaceful. And that comes from how you interact with him. I made reference to the fact that men want praise. Men also want to be trusted. So for example, and ladies, try this with the men you know and just observe the reaction. You know when you have a baby and the baby climbs up to a podium and you say to the baby, baby, jump, daddy will catch you. Or jump, mommy will catch you. And the baby jumps. How does that make you feel? At the point where the baby jumps, there's that 100% trust that they bestow on you. Because they say, even if I throw myself down from the podium, my father, my mother will not let me brush my feet against the stone. In the same way, when you're interacting with men, there has to be an opportunity for you to bring in how much you trust in them. This is where you speak to the God in the man, or you speak to the greater conscience, not his ego, his conscience in the man. For example, amongst men, this is amongst men, one of the reasons why men develop this brotherly love and connection is when, maybe in the heat of the moment, maybe there's an altercation, and one person says, I'm willing to die next to you. I'm willing to die next to you. In other words, this is your fight. This is your battle, but I love you so much that this battle that is yours has now become mine. Women can use the same approach by telling the man, for example, one of the reasons I admire you so much is because I know that if there was one person that I could call, and if I was in trouble, and there was one call I could make, that I could call you, and that you wouldn't question what I did. You would come there first and protect me. And afterwards, you would address what I did. That gives a man this feeling of being needed. Men have a need to be needed. The problem most women have, and the reason why men don't necessarily like to date women who are already married, who have been married or who have kids, is because the feeling is that, well, they will come second place and they won't be needed. They might be wanted, but not needed. So ladies, as part of you developing your non-sexual marketplace value, you have to understand how to admire, how to appreciate a man. And I don't know how to explain that in detail, but that's the exercise for you. You have to work on your temperament. Men are looking to be inspired. Men are looking to be entertained. Now, that doesn't mean we want you pole dancing always. We're looking for entertainment. We want what you say to be pleasing, to be welcoming, to be nice. We're looking for entertainment. We want, which is where the childlikeness comes in. The way a dog plays around, we're not asking you to be a dog and play around. We're simply saying you should have a welcoming demeanor. You should be enthusiastic, excited, exuberant, playful, joyful, fun to be around. And all of that comes not from your looks, not from your age, but from your soft skills, what you've learned. And it's much easier for this to take place with women who have observed their father and their mother interact in a similar fashion. Most men avoid unmarried women with kids for the primary reason that if the woman has 2 kids and she starts to date the man becomes the 3rd kid. The woman speaks to the man like a child. She addresses him like a child. And men do not want that. So in many ways, you have to almost undo and unlearn some of the things and the behaviors you already have. Your temperament, your attitude has to be in top form. And one of the best ways to deal with all of this is by making it clear to the man for your choices. Not by your suffering, and not by remaining celibate, and not by having no sexual partners, but by saying, I made a mistake. I've gone and I've seen a psychologist, and I've seen a psychiatrist, I've seen a counselor, and these are the results and the report provided. I've been discharged, I've been given a clear, I've been told you have overcome your problems. Now you can get back into the dating scene. Number 2, I'm in a gym. I train 5 times a week. I train across different groups, CrossFit, plyometrics, weightlifting, aerobics. I do group classes. I do yoga. I do some meditation. You're showing that you're working hard on your sexual marketplace value. Number 3, how you treat him at home. As a matter of fact, let me say something that will be slightly controversial. Ladies, if you are widowed, and if you are divorced, or if you're unmarried with kids, and you're dating someone, as soon as you've gone past the introduction and you've started dating, if there is some intimacy, one of the things you should not do is you should not be eating out. You should not be eating out for so many reasons. You should instead be dining in. When you go to a restaurant, there's a long process that takes place. You get ready. Sometimes you spend an hour traveling to, an hour traveling back. You sit down, then you have to wait for the food to come. And the food comes, you eat, and then you leave. So a typical date takes between 3 and 4 hours of your time. 3 to 4 hours. That's a lot of time. Instead, what you should do is you should dine in. Let's say you invite him to your house, but preferably tell him you're coming to his house. And when you get to his house, you should arrive there dressed as you would be if you were going out. Have him dressed as he would be if he is going out. But instead, you cook. You prepare a meal for him. Let him observe you prepare a meal in his kitchen. You put on an apron, you prepare the meal, and you serve the meal. In other words, what you're giving him is an experience. So he sees you and he observes. Remember, what men are trying to do, you're forcing the man to visualize what it would be like to live with you and to have you as a wife. So you get him to work with you. As a matter of fact, even when you're serving him, you do not do that alone. You prepare the meal with him, which means you spend about an hour preparing the meal. You have a glass of wine in between as you're preparing the meal. You're playing, you're laughing, you're touching each other, you're giggling, you're making jokes. And so suddenly, what is meant to be a date, which is somehow overblown, becomes an experience, a playful experience, which goes back to childlikeness and play. food is prepared, you sit down, you serve, you have dinner. Both of you go back to the kitchen, you reverse the roles. I'm not saying go to his house and become a slave. No, you reverse the roles. You take the lead in cooking, he takes the lead in cleaning. He washes the dishes, you dry the dishes. You have a conversation, you have wine, and then the date is gone. You spend 3 to 4 hours communicating with each other, interacting with each other, and most importantly, he gets to see your femininity and your traditional values and skills live. Now, this does not mean you do that every single day on every single date, but I'm simply saying what you're looking to do at the early stage of a relationship is show why, despite the choices you made in the past, why you're still a catch, why he should still choose you, why Becky is more attractive, although she has a child, than Anne. Now, let me say something that women who have children should know, or women who perhaps are not as physically attractive as other women should know. A man who really wants to have a family wants a legacy. So he focuses on his children and who will raise his children. One of the primary roles of a woman is what we call a scribe. If you go and read any books from antiquities, you always had a scribe. Back in the days when you had kings, there was always one person who was a scribe, the person who recorded all the events that took place and what the king said. In other words, a scribe was the one who chronicled the life of a king and the life of a community and the life of a people. The woman's role is a scribe. She chronicles the life of her man, the life of the kids, and the life of the family. So, as part of the experience, a man is always looking for, in addition to his legacy, he's thinking about, would she be a good scribe? Because we die before women. We outdie you, usually. Certainly the case if you marry someone who's older than you, the man older than the woman, we tend to die before you do. So we're thinking about our legacy, our children. We're thinking about the woman that can raise these kids in the right way, teach them the right words, guide them to the right principles, protect them where she needs, and scribe everything that is needed so that the kids remember their fathers. So as part of going to see the man in his house and playing with him, he's observing how you could chronicle his life and how you can chronicle the family's life and how you can chronicle the family's legacy. That is a competitive advantage that women who are happy to work on the non-sexual marketplace value can bring to the table so that they outperform other women who do not have the same marital status as they do. I hope that was useful.